StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई affordable.
Hello everyone, welcome to this session on ethics. I will touch upon the GS4 paper. Many of you are going to appear this year. Some of you will appear in 2024. But my suggestion to all of you is, don't wait for your preliminary exam to come out in 2024 to prepare for ethics paper. The preparation has to start now. The reason is that apart from what you're going to write in the paper in ethics, you have to hone your skills to write that. And for that, you have to become a better communicator. It is not merely good for you to understand what I'm going to tell you just now, because I'm going to talk about ethics, various concepts therein, and help you understand them. But more importantly, apart from understanding, you'll have to write that down in the examination paper. And for that, if you don't hone your tools now, your communication skills now, irrespective of the fact whether you've understood it or not, you will not be able to write it. So there are two parts to it. One is understanding various aspects of ethics, aptitude and attitude, and other to be able to write what you understand. Today, I will focus on understanding what is expected of you when you appear in the examination, when you write that paper. And secondly, I will also try and explain to you how you should try and approach this paper. This is an extremely important paper because it makes a world of a difference. I was going through the mark sheets of some of those that have qualified, and generally speaking, people don't score well in ethics, whereas my feeling is that you can do very well. And I have come across certain mark sheets where people have done very well. So a difference of 5-10 marks can make a huge difference in the rankings. If you are not in the Indian Administrative Service, maybe you missed it by 5 or 10 marks. Getting those marks in ethics will help you get the service that you want and elsewhere. Whereas in some other cases, I've seen people missing out on getting into the civil service by 2 marks, by 7 marks. So ethics paper is very, very important. Secondly, there is a reason behind introduction of ethics as a paper in the civil service. Because there was a general feeling that this aspect of the attitude, this aspect of officers was missing out. And hence, the UPSC is looking at your understanding of how would you approach if certain issues come up to you when you do become a civil servant. So they are also trying to gauge your approach. Hence, it is important not merely to learn by heart various definitions, but to understand the essence of various principles, and that is going to be what I'm going to tell you today. So let us start with the first slide here. Now, you have to understand the question that comes to you. I have not brought in an illustration here, but maybe when we discuss case studies, we will take it up. You have to understand the questions very clearly, because each question will have analyze, as I have mentioned later on, elucidate. These have different connotations, different meanings. So when you analyze something which is, if they ask you to analyze a particular feature, a particular concept, you have to go into explaining the logic and the rationale of what is being said there. Similarly, when you said elucidate, the meaning of elucidate is you explain, you elaborate. There, when you elucidate, you are not going into the critique of what is being said. You don't have to go into the critique of it. It is merely expansion of what has been mentioned there. So that is what elucidate, the term itself means that you explain what is there without giving any value judgment to that. But if they say discuss, then you are looking at different dimensions that are put up before you. So these terms are extremely important for you when you approach a test paper. After this session, when you see this, I would suggest you go back and have a look at the question papers and see what is the implication of what is being asked in the question. Sometimes we confuse, we have a set frame in our mind and we start answering a question in a particular manner. We explain, we elucidate, we look at pros and cons, not necessarily in all those questions. Then the last point that I mentioned here, when they say justify, meaning thereby that you have to look at the justification of what has been given there. Now, justification does not necessarily mean that you agree with what you're saying. You can still first try and justify that, and then if you have a counter argument, you can give that. So you have to understand the question very clearly. Many of us don't spend time on understanding the question before getting down to answering it. there would be certain definitions that you may have to memorize. But my suggestion to all of you is that don't memorize unless you understand. Memorizing is basically to say the same thing in lesser number of words. You may have understood it, but if you memorize a particular definition, and I'll come to some of those later on, then it will be easy for you to express in fewer words. You know, sometimes if you're not, you may be clear in your mind as to what it is, but when you get down to expressing it, you take a lot of time writing it down. So if you memorize, and I'm repeating it again, don't memorize unless you understood a concept. Memorization is primarily to save time and be precise in what you're saying. You may have understood it. And finally, my suggestion to you is, they may not be direct questions on Gandhi, or there would be. I mean, many papers do have those questions. Read Gandhi. And if you find time, or do find time, to read my Experiments for Truth. It is ethics in operation, actually. And you will yourself discover certain situations where you will be forced to think on certain aspects from Gandhi's life. Because as I look at the question papers, it may not directly say that that question is emanating from Gandhi did or Gandhian philosophy, but I think he was perhaps an epitome of ethics. And that you will understand. As I go along, I'll keep coming back to this aspect of Gandhi. Now, what is ethics? You know, for the time being, let's not look at this slide. Very simply speaking, ethics is what is right and what is wrong. As simple as that. But the real trouble begins after that. Because what is right for me may not be right for you. What is right for me, the two of us may not be right for the family where we exist. What is right for the family and the two of us may not be right for the society. So the right and the wrong itself changes. But fundamentally speaking, ethics is understanding what is right and wrong. Now, let us try and go into the details of it. And here we say, a set of principles that guide human actions in a way acceptable to the society. Now, here I'd like to bring in a bit of a difference between ethics and values. You and I may have values which may differ from you and me. I may be a non-vegetarian, you may be a vegetarian. So our values are different. So I feel that non-vegetarian eating is not correct. For you, it may be correct. So there could be a difference in values. In a larger context, when these values come to be accepted by the society. So for example, in a Jain society, a person who has a personal values of being a vegetarian, the society has those values there. So those become society, Jain society value. And when they come to be accepted by a society, then it becomes ethics. So the hierarchy is, you have your personal values, then there are ethical values, and the next stage is what? Laws. So when ethical principles or ethical values, they get codified, they become laws. So here you must understand one thing very clearly. These may be your personal values, right? Now, all your personal values may not be similar to the values that get accepted by the society as ethical values. So, you know, some of your values could be accepted by the society, some of them not. So, here is an area where you may have your personal values which are not accepted by the society at large. But a lot of it is. And there could be some values which are societal values which may not be your personal values. I'll give you an example. When I say society, I'm interchangeably using it as an organizational value. You work in an organization. You work, say, for example, you get admitted in the Indian Military Academy. Now, you have your own values when you came here. When you joined the Indian Military Academy, you had your values. But when you come to the academy, you have to accommodate to these values of that organization. Meaning thereby that you believe there is no harm in getting up late in the morning, right? That's your personal value. That's your personal value. But when you go to IMA, you will have to jolly well get up in the morning because you got to go for physical exercises. So that's where here it is. So there could be a conflict between your personal values and the values of the organization. And hence, I call it the ethos of that organization. You know, the term ethics emanates from ethos. That is the environment. What is accepted? What are the accepted values of that organization? Now, in many of the cases, you'll find that what is ethical, some of it becomes law. So, you have law here, meaning thereby that when ethics get, these are the ethical principles, when they get codified into law, they become laws. Why am I telling you all this? Because when you get down to answering this question, this distinction between the hierarchy of law, ethics, and personal values has to be understood very clearly. Because there could be a conflict between this, this, and this. And when you get down to answer case studies, you have to keep in mind one thing very clearly. This is absolutely not negotiable. So when you look up case studies, and we'll be discussing some of the case studies today, the first principle to be considered in determining what is right and wrong is whether there is an existing law. If there is a law, then all these become subservient to that law. It has to be understood very clearly. So in all case studies, you have to first look at whether there is a law. So for example, if law mandates a particular action, irrespective of your personal values, irrespective of the ethics, you'll have to follow that law, whether you like it or not. So that has to be understood very clearly. Second, there would be situations where a particular ethical value, for example, when you enter an office, in some of the offices, there is this custom of greeting each other, smile, greeting with a smile. So that is the ethos of that organization. It's not legally mandated that you should smile at somebody. If you don't smile at somebody, no one is going to throw you out of the office. For example, in some other organization, it is generally believed that you should take your team members along with you. You should protect them. There's no law to protect your subordinate. But that's the ethos of that organization. It is normally assumed that a civil servant will take care of the interest of his subordinates. He will take them along. He will protect them. He will delegate it to them. These are ethical principles. They are not codified anywhere in the law. Nowhere does the code of conduct say that you should protect your subordinate officer. It doesn't say. But it is expected of an officer to do that. That's where ethics comes in. You may have a personal value at some point in time that I'm not bothered about others. That's your personal value. There is a conflict. But this is the hierarchy. If there is an ethos or ethical value that is accepted in the organization that you're working, then you have to be careful about following that. And as a civil servant, you have to be very careful because this exam is for you to get into the civil service. So you must understand what is legally mandated for a civil servant, non-negotiable. You must understand what is ethical for the civil servant, and I'll come to these points subsequently. You'll have to follow that. Though, if you don't follow the ethical principles, no penal action will be taken against you. That's the difference between laws and ethics. Though laws may be a subset of ethics, that's a different matter. But it is not necessary for every ethical value to be codified as law. It will be expected of you. If you don't follow that, no penal action will be taken against you, but it will be believed that it is unethical. Right? Personal value system, yes, if they're not in conflict with the above two, you follow them, no one stops it to doing that. Now, the critical point here is when there is a dilemma of a choice. What do you choose when there's an option available to you? That's what ethical dilemma is all about. And the bottom line here is whether it causes harm to somebody. Now, here again, there could be situations where in any case there is harm happening and you have to decide whether I'll allow it to happen or not. I'll give you an example here. You are a photographer, and you are roaming around in a jungle and you find that a lion has suddenly attacked a deer. Now, as a photographer, you have to take that photograph, but someone may say that you have to save that deer. I mean, this lion is taking the life of a deer. It's jolly well your job to do that. And some people have this empathy towards animals and they would like to save him. Now, the question here is, by saving that deer, what is happening? You are going against a natural principle of a lion or a tiger devouring a deer because that's his food. So if you save them and everyone goes on to save the deer, the poor lion will die. So it's against the social laws of nature. If it is against the laws of nature, then it can't be called ethical. Now let me take it slightly differently. Suppose you are going in a street and you find that someone, a young man is trying to bully an old man. Okay, he's bullying an old man. Now, what would be your personal value system could say that the old man should not be ill-treated by a young man. Fair enough. But whether you should go ahead and do it, or you should take a photograph and then print it on the next day, or maybe go on Instagram and say, this is what the society is where the old men are not treated. So professionally speaking, probably you are correct. But I think the ethos of the society is that you have to stop that young man from beating the old man. So there could be choices that you have to make. And the bottom line here is, and as we'll see in the case studies, is whether what you are doing is acceptable to a society. So for example, if a young man is trying to beat or harass an old man, every society would believe that the old people have to be taken care of. Now, your action in stopping that young man from beating that old man is not causing harm to anybody. So it's very clear. I am taking very simple examples. When we take up case studies, we'll take much more complex examples just to explain to you. And you must also understand that each society may have a different ethos altogether. And not only that, the ethos itself may change over a period of time. Look at Germany during the 1930s. The values of that German society are different from the German society of today. Hence, you must also understand there is no mathematical formula of telling you what is right and what is wrong. You have to learn it your way, as Aristotle very correctly pointed out, that if you want to live a virtuous life, you have to determine for yourself as to what is right and what is wrong, and that you learn through experience. So there is no formula that I say, if it fits into the formula, it is right or wrong. It will all depend on the set of circumstances that you are in. Take, for example, if you are a district magistrate of a district, there is drought in your district and the adjoining district, right? Now, the food grains for all these districts have to pass through your district. Now, as a district magistrate, what should you do? Should you stop the grains going to the other district and use those grains in your own district, or allow those grains to go through? Now, there is a conflict here because it's not a personal interest that you have in mind. You have the interest of the local denizens in your mind. Yet, it will be unethical of you to stop those grains from going to the other district because it has a long-term damage. So, you have to look at the damage and the long-term consequences of what you're doing. So, this is in summary what it is. First, it is mandated by the nature. As I gave you in the first example, there are certain things naturally which are accepted, that a lion or a tiger will kill the deer. So it's mandated by nature. It's very natural. Then it is approved by the society. Then that is where the value system of the society. Here again, as I said earlier, societies may vary from one place to the other. So your treatment will depend on which organization you are in. What is the organizational ethos of that organization, and you'll do accordingly. And it does not cause harm to anyone in the long run. In some cases, when there is choice of evaluating the competitive harm, then you have to take a call which is less harmful. And again, when we do case studies, we'll take up each one of these. Now, I had mentioned these earlier, but let me reiterate them here. Values are the individual principles. This has to be understood very clearly. We confuse between values and ethics. Not many people are able to clearly understand this. In my understanding, values are personal in nature. So, they are individual principles and qualities that guide judgment, behavior of a person or a group. The source is within. You decide. Now, these values, personal values, get germinated in you through a variety of processes. First, when you are part of a family, so values that are cherished in a family become your own values. So, for example, I shouldn't be saying it, but if a particular family is miserly in nature, then you imbibe those values of yourself being a miser. Then, if your family cherishes the value of being truthful and you're not telling a lie, for example, a phone call, your dad is at home, not on leave, he's bunked the office, and a phone comes from the office and dad tells you that he's not at home, then what are the values that you're going to imbibe? So the values that you imbibe are the ones that you get with your immediate family to begin with. Then as you expand, you go to the society, you go to the school, you imbibe values there. So these values get imbibed over a period of time, and these are personal values. But these personal values are determined by the values of the people around you. So they keep evolving. So these are not frozen. For an individual, they're certainly not frozen. And these change also, as I said. So for example, a doctor who's usually very busy all the time, and when he's having a free time, he switches his phone off. Next day, he gets to know that someone was trying to reach him who was on his deathbed, and the doctor was aware of what could be done to him. And since doctor could not be approached, that patient passed away. Now, this one event can actually change his whole attitude. So, the values in an individual are determined by a number of factors. They are determined by your peer group, your family, your surroundings. Events like this, like Angulimala, changed. You heard of the story of Angulimala. He changed dramatically after he met Gautam Buddha. I mean, he used to loot and murder people around, but he changed it. So events can change individual. So these values get individually ingrained in a person. Then ethics is a code of behavior approved and accepted and formally or informally by the society. It is very important. It need not be formally written somewhere, the society accepts it. So in an organization or in a society, there are some inherent values which may or may not be codified by them. But once again, I'd like to reiterate that such values, there is no penalty per se if you violate them. Penalty comes when it becomes illegal, when these ethical values are codified. Then values can be aethical, unethical, or ethical. Because these are personal values, it may not have a meaning whatsoever in a societal context. So, for values to be treated as ethical, they have to have the approval of the society or the organization where you are in. I mean, when I use the term society, I'm using the term organization also. I gave the example of Indian Military Academy. Most of you are aspiring to become civil servant. You become a part of the ethos of the civil service. Now, yet again, I'd like to repeat here. The code of conduct is codified ethics. There you have no choice but to follow. But the other attributes that I was mentioning with regard to protecting, delegating, helping others, these are values for which you will not be penalized. So they become pure ethical values, which you may or may not do. Why should you be ethical? Probably the next slide will explain. I had mentioned this to you, that since values get embedded in an individual over a period of time, there are a number of aspects that influence those values. The personality, the family, the peer group where you're working, episodic event. I gave you that example of Angulimala or the doctor, or sometimes in a situation. And then the professional code also determine your values. So many people who join the Indian Military Academy may not be disciplined to begin with, but once they start living in that environment, they become disciplined. You know, every armyman is not as disciplined before he joins the army, but once he joins the army, then he adopts that discipline, adopts the values of the army. So they change. So it all depends on a variety of factors that such values get determined. Now, this is very, very important for you all to understand very clearly, because if you don't understand why be ethical, you will never be ethical. What is the value that ethical conduct brings to an individual, to an organization, to a society? Because if there is no value that comes to you, just because Mr. Anil Swarup is telling you or somebody else is telling you to become ethical, you will not. So you must understand the why of it. Why should you be ethical? So it imparts credibility to an individual. So if you're ethical, and I experienced that in my own career, once it was clearly established that I would usually not do any wrong, not many wrong people came to me, asked me for a wrong work. I had this dilemma in the first few years of my career. But later on, in the later half of my career, no politician ever asked me for anything wrong, because it imparts a particular credibility. And if there was some decision to be taken, some crisis to be managed, you will be called upon, because you develop that reputation over a period of time of being a person who has an ethical conduct. So one of the biggest reasons why you have to be ethical is that it imparts certain credibility to you. And you yourself may not be personally knowing many officers, but you would call, okay, Mr. T. N. Session, oh, how good an officer he was. He set the election commission in order. Why? Because the way he conducted himself, it imparted a sense of credibility. And that's why people remember him for that. You would like to become a TN session, no? So, if you have to become a person you admire for his ethical conduct, you'll have to become one. And why are they admired? Because they had ethical conduct. Then, if you have an ethical conduct, it gives you a lot of strength, So again, in my career, I came across many situations where tough decisions had to be taken, but if you are consistently ethical, it doesn't become very difficult for you to take a decision. So, for example, when I was posted as District Magistrate Lakhimpur Kheri, the Ram Janmabhoomi agitation was going on. The district president of the ruling party wanted to take out a funeral procession. Now, district president of a ruling party is a big deal. I tried to convince him not to take out a funeral procession because that would have led to riots in the district. He did not agree, so we had to arrest him. Now, I arrested district president of the ruling party. And this could have been possible only if your antecedents were such that people would not doubt your objectivity. And if they didn't doubt your objectivity, no one would say that he did it for political reason or for this reason. These days, there's so many allegations against civil servants even that they are behaving like politicians, meaning thereby the ethical conduct of those civil servants has not been up to the mark. So, it is important for you to have that, and if you have that, it becomes easy for you to take decisions. Then, of course, you build social relationships, you build professional relationships. Your job becomes that much easier because then what you say gets done. So, ethical conduct does help at an individual level. Now, at an organization level, look at the brand, the way it is built. You talk of Tatas, you talk of Maruti. These are brands that are built, but there are others who could not build brand because of their unethical image. So, for an organization to behave ethically is very important because much of their product gets sold because over a period of time, they have developed a reputation for themselves and hence ethical conduct plays. Then employee-employee relationship, it's very important. Your employees can be retained, and there are organizations like TCS where they don't leave their organization because that is the sort of a relationship they have. That is why TCS or Infosys, these are organizations where employees have continued for a longer time, and the output of these employees is much greater because of the ethical relationship that they have. Then stakeholder, the outsider. As a consumer, don't you look for a brand? What is the purpose of a brand? Brand is that you know that quality is assured. And this quality is assured over a period of time. And hence, ethical conduct here assumes enormous importance, not only in the government sector, but in the private sector as well. Then at a societal level, it's very important. If a society, and many of us have this habit, you go to Germany or England, you say, how disciplined are the people there? Even if there's no policeman standing at the crossings, everyone will stop the car at the red light, and where there is only green light that they will go. So it's very important. That's how this society gets its image, a particular society or a country or an organization. Then if the behavior is ethical in nature, then there are lesser tensions because people have faith in the administration. In UP, we use the term Iqbal. That's the belief in the administration, meaning thereby they believe that the administration will take the right decision, and that helps. Similarly, equality. If you have equality in a society, if you have justice prevailing in the society, then people will not take law and order in their own hands. If that happens, it will be a lot of trouble for them. So this becomes very, very important. In public life, it's extremely, extremely important because any public servant or a government servant has a greater responsibility than a common man. So his conduct, his behavior has to be very, very important. And herein, dealing with everyone fairly and equally and abstaining from doing anything that creates trouble in public. This is very, very important for ethics in public life. And those that hold public office, placing public interest over private interest. Many civil servants and even politicians make sacrifices and they get their name. So when you have politician like, again, I mentioned about Mahatma Gandhi, he made enormous amount of personal sacrifice and made him a public figure so that he's even admired and adored even now. So that's what ethics does to a person holding a public office. Then a lot of funds are with public servants, with civil servants. They manage those funds. So mismanaging them can obviously be illegal because that's the law. You are not supposed to do that. But not only that, where and how the funds are utilized, are given, whether they are being best used. This may not be laid down in law, but anyone who's ethical in nature will try and get the best out of every penny that the government spends. And of course, the regulatory compliance. Now, I'm not going through the details of it, but I would suggest to all of you to have a look at it. There's a maximum of legality and rationality. That is something which is legal, rational, maximum responsibility and accountability, the maximum of excellence. You know, excellence is not laid down in any law. It's not laid down. But doing your work to the best of your capability is ethical. And that will create a reputation, or they'll make your reputation in a manner that people will start believing you. Then maximum fusion, getting diverse interests together, responsiveness. Now, again, responsiveness is not laid down anywhere in the law, but some civil servants are very responsive in nature. They get a lot of support from people around them because they're responsive in nature. Similarly, there's a maximum good of maximum numbers. Utilitarianism. Compassion. Compassion is not written in any law, but it is considered to be ethical, to be compassionate. A very, very important aspect of civil servants. Similarly, national interest. You have to do things in national interest. I have yet to come across this term being used in any law per se, but it is considered that whatever you do, you should do in maximum justice, of course. There are laws to this. Transparency, again, it is not written in any law, but I think transparency helps everyone. And that's the watchword these days. And finally, maximum of integrity. I am skipping some of these slides. These details are available in a variety of books. I'm just putting it here that ethics for a regulator assumes even greater importance because you're regulating things that are happening on the ground. And hence, you have to be non-discriminatory, you have to be equitable, you have to be sympathetic to the weaker section. Now, again, being sympathetic to the weaker section of society is not laid down in any law, but it is expected of civil servant to be sympathetic to them. Then avoid conflict of interest. If a regulator has a conflict of interest on the issues that he's handling, then there could be trouble and overreach. We have this interesting case of coal block auctions where on account of the overreach of the CAG, a lot of damage was done. So, the regulator has to remain with those boundaries. Then, of course, common man may not interest you so much because you are aspiring civil servants. Your concern will be more of ethics for the civil servant. But of course, it does impact the lives of others. Now, thinking well of others when you're dealing with others, there has to be consistency between your words and action. That is for a common man. It is what you tell others to do. There can't be a dishonesty, an intellectual dishonesty in you professing something else and doing something else. Then in private life, I think there has to be consistency. If you are not ethical in your personal contact, in your personal behavior, in your personal interaction, it is difficult for you to become ethical publicly. Then, of course, when you're dealing with the children, it's very important because, as I said in the beginning, how children will evolve in their behavior will depend on how we treat the children, because that becomes an input for them to become ethical or not to become ethical. Now, a subtle difference between ethics and attitude. Now, attitude is something which a person sees or thinks of a target thing, the emotions that arise in you when you see something. So, you have people, when a problem gets given to them, they have a positive attitude of finding solution to that problem. So, but there is a link between your value system and your attitude. Because if you are ethical in nature, then the chances are that you look positively at issues that come to you. So, attitude becomes extremely, extremely critical. Now, attitude does not change overnight. It takes time with your personal experience as you go on along. But it is so critical for a civil servant that if he doesn't have a positive attitude, if it doesn't have a sympathetic attitude towards weaker sections, then there could be trouble because he will not be able to deliver to his fullest potential. So, it is how you look at things. So, there's a usual example of half glass. Some treat it as half full, some see it as half empty. The objective reality is the same, but your attitude determines how you're perceiving that objective reality. And aptitude Aptitude has no value. Whereas attitude is positive, negative, you have value there. But in aptitude, there is no value. It is your inclination. So some people have this aptitude towards becoming an artist. Some have an aptitude towards numbers. They would rather become engineers. So it's not an acquired, but an inherent quality in individual. So as I mentioned earlier, attitude could be categorized as positive or negative, but aptitude is value-free. Attitude has to do with character, but aptitude has to do with competence and personal action. There are foundational values of objectivity, whether how objectively, how you look at issues, but it gets impacted by what you see first. So your reaction to a particular situation will depend on whether you've seen it recently, whether it happened to you personally. Many of our values get determined by our personal experiences. So sometimes they impact us. Now, again, I'm not going into the details of it, but briefly mentioning what happens here is in integrity, whereas honesty is event-based, that you're honest. Integrity is your consistent behavior over a period of time. So to give you a simple example, you come across a red light and there's nobody around. There's no police wala around, but you stop your car. That depends on your integrity because no one is watching it. Integrity is when no one is watching you, whether you're honest at that point in time. You can be honest without having the integrity because on that particular occasion, for some reason, you have an honest behavior, your honest response, but integrity is consistently honest, being honest over a period of time. And that's what it says here, that integrity is having strong moral principles that result invariably in honest conduct and behavior. It is not merely being honest, but an inherent belief in being honest. Now, integrity is a belief system that you are not honest because someone else told you to be honest. You believe that honesty is the best policy, and it's a belief system that makes you conduct in an honest manner, irrespective of the set of circumstances. That's what integrity is all about. Then there is a foundational values of impartiality, because here again, being impartial, or you should be impartial, for a civil servant to be impartial, I don't think it's laid down in any law. But most of the organizations believe that you have to be impartial, at least for the civil servants. Then, dedication to public service. You have to talk to people. You have to, many civil servants are not accessible. One of the criticisms of civil servants is they are not accessible. Now, again, accessibility is not laid down in any law, but it is the ethos of the civil service that you should be accessible and hence talk to the people, understand their problems, appreciate those problems, place yourself in their shoes. Now, these are important attributes for you to become a dedicated civil servant. Then tolerance. This again is extremely important. For a civil servant, even more so, because you will come across, and as an IAS officer or a police officer, you will come across many people who come very agitated to you. So you have to look at it that way. And then, if you're tolerant, you will not start believing that what you say is always correct. You are prepared to listen to others and even take some corrective measures and even change your own value systems, because you have an open mind and you're prepared to listen to others. And because it promotes harmony. Of course, compassion towards weaker sections of society, again, not written in any law, but I think is a very foundational value of a civil servant. Constitutional values, you are aware, it is all written down in black and white in the Constitution, and these have to be adhered to in any case. So that is what ethics is all about. I hope whatever I have tried to convey to you, for you to understand the importance of being ethical, the various aspects of ethics, integrity, aptitude, but my suggestion to you is that study all these with examples from any book that you pick up. You will be able to understand these concepts even better. In the next part of this session, we'll take up some case studies and we will see how we can bring forth some of what you understood today and see how we can address those case studies. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this session.
StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।